Hello and welcome to this episode of the failure in the space industry. In October 2014, a rocket named Anteras uh, lost its power shortly after clearing the launch pad. And it went back to the launch pad area, and safety personnel sent a command to destruct the rocket in order to minimize the effect of the damage. This is the topic of today YouTube video. While they are recovering the debris after the explosion, three teams are built up in order to investigate the reason that this explosion happened. One team from Orbital ATK, who was the owner of the rocket, another team from NASA, and also a team from International Space Station invited to to be involved in the investigation. All the team easily can find the problem where it is initiated. They figure out it was one of the rocket engine, and specifically a turbo pump, who failed during the liftoff and caused the explosion. But the the question was why this rocket engine failed. This is make some discussion and differences between different teams. Let's put the technical detail for later, and I will go for some history of the why this orbital ETK come to the scene for the space industry. It was during 1980s, United States or NASA makes the space shuttle in order to deliver both cargo to the International Space Station and commercial cargo to the space with the space shuttle. And it was planned to frequently fly with the space shuttle. Unfortunately, in 1986, a Challenger space shuttle uh, exploded shortly after the liftoff, and 7 crew members were died instantly. NASA decided to reduce the number of the flying with the space shuttle in order to minimize the risk of such a failure, and only the cargo for International Space Station delivered by space shuttle. Then it was in 2003, another disaster happened, and Columbia Space Shuttle this time exploded during re-entry to the Earth, and again 7 crew members were died. NASA this time decided to retire the space shuttle, and there is a gap to deliver even the cargo to the International Space Station. So US needs a transportation system for its own cargo to the ISS. They are dependent on the Russian government until they figure out an alternative. At that time, Obama strongly pushed for the private sector to be involved in the space industry. And this all the reason gives a good opportunity to the private sector, like a company like Orbital ATK, to make a rocket and fill the gap for space transportation in US. Always the private sector like to make the rocket cheap and fast in order to be profitable. And in order to reduce the cost of the fabrication of the rocket, they buy a motor from Soviet Union, from Russia, but the motor was built 40 years ago during the Soviet Union. But even though the motor was old, but the engine was old, It works perfectly during the test and the previous launch until 2014. Let's get back to the detail. The orbital ATK, after they recover the debris, they figure out one of the component has a scratch on that, and this causes a rotational component rub into the stationary component, and which gives heat and fire. And they said that they believe that the manufacturing error was the problem of this failure. But NASA said that even though the one component has a scratch and it is found from the debris, but still it is not sufficient to say that it's a manufacturing error. It can be a design error, and because of three reasons. First of all, the 4 months before the flight, they have another failure on the test, which the component get the same scratch as the one in the rocket failure. Second, they check all the engine and spare part, and none of them has scratched the same error, except one of them, which goes for the excessive test on the ground. And third, they see that there is no enough information for manufacturing process of the engine, so it's difficult to decide that it's a 100% manufacturing error. In this scenario, NASA believed that it is a design error. The design of the engine, the bearing, the support of the engine, and also the test, which is not sufficient for this engine. And this can be a design error. There is also another company who worked with the orbital ATK to design and fabricate the propulsional system. Its name Aerojet Rocketdyne. They suggested that the foreign debris inside the component of the engine makes this failure happen. And NASA also said that they found silica and titanium in the component of the rocket engine, which increased the chance of the failure. But orbital ATK don't believe on that, and they said there is foreign debris doesn't have anything with this failure. In order to end the dispute between Aerojet and orbital ATK, Aerojet Rocketdyne transferred $50 million to the orbital ATK. Sometimes you have to push on the limit, and here in this scenario, the orbital ATK push on the limit to deliver a rocket very fast into the market, and with not enough test and using a motor from 40 years ago, they make something cheap but effectively to deliver the cargo to the space. And there is always should be like that, and if there is no failure, then it means that you spend unnecessary time and money on development. And even though the cost of the explosion, rocket explosion, including launch, cleaning the launch area, delay on the cargo, making new cargo, all of them are huge, but still profitable to use a rocket, to use an engine or other component off the shelf and make a rocket and deliver the cargo to the space. Finally, the teams make some recommendations such as replace the engine, make the full acceptance test for the engine and propulsional system, better communication between the NASA and the private sector, and more complete contract between them, which is makes sense because it was at the beginning of the this collaboration between NASA and private sector, and there are many things has to develop even though in the contract. That's for this video, and I hope you enjoy it.